morning. This is Anna Patterson with the North Carolina Housing Coalition. Thank you for joining us this morning for our housing call. And without further ado, I will turn it over to our Director of Housing Policy, Stephanie Watkins-Cruz.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you all are having a great week so far. I want to first just start and say thank you all for your patience on our call this morning, Tuesday, February 4th. We had some technical difficulties, so we decided to re-record. That way we make sure that you hear the information that we were giving out and it's a better sound quality. So thank you again for your patience. We're going to kick it off with organizational updates. Last week, you may have seen an email from us about the North Carolina Housing Day 2025 at the North Carolina General Assembly that's happening this year on Wednesday, April 9th in downtown Raleigh. The registration for that event is now open. The goal of this event is to make housing a top priority for your elected officials and to tell them why housing matters to you, your work, your community, as they develop the state's two-year budget, as well as legislative priorities for the rest of the year. If you haven't already checked out our county profiles, make sure to do so. We know from that data that 48% of renters and 19% of homeowners in North Carolina are paying more than 30% of their income on housing, so they are cost burdened, and housing prices are continuing to rise dramatically across the state in counties both rural, urban, and suburban. The statistics, though, don't tell the whole story. So it's really important that we have folks from all across the state, from all sides of our housing ecosystem and network, talking to our legislators and hearing that can hear directly from you, their constituents, about the housing needs that you're seeing and how they can support and invest in this issue. At the North Carolina Housing Day, you're going to have the opportunity to meet with your state legislators to advocate for housing. You'll also be able to connect with other folks in the field, practitioners and advocates from across the state, and learn a bit more about how you can engage with advocacy and information year round. The day will begin around 8:30 and end by 3 p.m. The registration is free for the Housing Day. There will be light breakfast and lunch will be provided. The day before Housing Day, so April 8th, we will be having a Housing Champions networking dinner at Nest Raleigh. This is going to be a great opportunity to connect with our fellow Housing Day hosts, the North Carolina Coalition on Homelessness and Habitat for Humanity of North Carolina, as well as fellow advocates from across the state and special legislative guests. We're going to have a cocktail hour that begins at 6:30 with dinner served at 7, and tickets are $35 per person. There's going to be a separate link in the call notes for you to register for that dinner so that you can go to both or just go to one depending on your availability and what you're interested in. Moving on to federal and national updates. The main two things I want to kind of talk about on that scale is that we are, one, approaching March 14th fairly quickly. March 14th is important because it is the funding deadline that Congress has before we enter a possible partial government shutdown. There's really no clear path forming right now to the final fiscal year 2025 budget agreement. And so there is a lot of still confusion and chaos, particularly around the budget committee's original plan, especially since there was the memo that was released last week, which derailed a lot of their committee's work and their conversations. The memo I'm speaking of is the memo of the Office of Management and Budget memo that states there will be a federal freeze on grants and loans. And that's the second thing I want to talk about. So last week, on January 27th, this memo and executive order was released, and it was supposed to go into effect on January 28th at 5 p.m. However, there was a federal judge that placed a temporary stay until February 3rd, 2025, which was yesterday, citing they wanted to understand a bit more on what was happening and also explore all the incoming litigation and arguments on this executive order. On January 29th, the memo from the Office of Management and Budget was rescinded, but there's a lot of communication that was still coming from the White House that indicates there's really no plans to stop the halting and evaluation of all federal programs. February 3rd, again, the temporary stay expired, but also on February 3rd, another federal judge granted a TRO, or a temporary restraining order, on the efforts to freeze federal funds. So this gives an extension to folks, so still being able to access their funds for the time being. As we continue to gain clarity, we promise to let you know. One thing I want to lift up is that, related to that, is that we really encourage you all to continue calling and communicating with your congressional delegates. Folks were turning off their servers, turning off their phones, people's pages were crashing. There was a lot of effort statewide, nationwide, but statewide, around this issue, because it doesn't just impact one part of our housing ecosystem. So if you haven't already, we do have a form. It's a very brief, in which we would like you to tell us a little bit about how this would affect your work and your community. But we've updated it slightly because we know and we have heard about issues with payment portals and accessing funds, even to this day. So we want to understand what you're seeing if you have been impacted. We want to understand that a little bit better so that we can continue to lift up these stories to our elected officials, part of our congressional delegation. Moving on to state and local updates. So last week was the first week of the long legislative session where the work really kicked off. And last week was really clear that a big priority is going to be disaster recovery, of course, in the months after Hurricane Helene. So on Wednesday, there was a House Select Committee on Hurricane Helene. And on Thursday morning, there was a Joint Legislative Commission on Governmental Operations Subcommittee on Hurricane Recovery meeting that was talking about previous and ongoing disaster recovery efforts in Eastern North Carolina, as well as updates and questions for the new leadership over GROW-NC, which is the division that was created, the agency that was created to handle recovery in the West. If you would like to see a summary, I did a write-up for that first week, and you can see kind of what was talked about in the committees, what was talked about when the House and Senate convened, as well as other things that I noticed throughout the week. On the topic of disaster recovery, yesterday, Governor Josh Stein updated his request for the North Carolina General Assembly and requested a additional $1.07 billion in Hurricane Helene recovery funding. Part of that request includes housing, and the total the total in housing request is about $263 million. The requests for housing include funding for home reconstruction and repair, affordable housing, repair and construction of shelters and homes, as well as rental, mortgage, and utility assistance, homeowner and renter unmet needs, housing stabilization services, and financial assistance for the homeless, as well as disaster legal services to the folks at North Carolina Legal Aid and Fiscal Legal Services that are helping a lot of people navigate recovery and federal resources and state resource and all types of legal issues that arise post-disaster. Most of these funds that the governor requested would address immediate needs and help folks get back into permanent housing more quickly. And there was an emphasis in his request, as well as in the conversations that I heard in the committee meetings last week, on the fact that federal funds for housing in particular are not expected to be dispersed for a number of months. There is already a delay in funds that we've already been approved for as a state. There's already a delay in receiving those funds, and more than likely, the additional funds that were allocated in the package passed by Congress in December will also be delayed, not just because of the federal freeze, despite it having a restraining order, but also because it has taken a long time for those funds to actually reach communities after disaster. And that is just a trend that we've seen historically. Adjacent to this issue is the issue of insurance. So the third thing I want to lift up for state and local updates is that the North Carolina Department of Insurance recently announced that they have negotiated with the North Carolina Rate Bureau to a statewide average homeowners insurance rate increase of 7.5% for 2025 and an additional 7.5% increase in 2026. Some of the reasons that they cited were climate change and inflation. And just as a reminder, last year, the Rate Bureau originally requested a change of up to 99% in some high-risk areas last January. So also as part of the agreement, the maximum rate increase for any area, including the coast, cannot exceed 35% over the next 2 years, meaning that some places across our state will have rate increases that are higher than 7.5% in 2025 and 2026. Moving on to events and resources and other items. The main event that I want to lift up for you all is happening tomorrow, February 5th. It's the Western North Carolina Town Hall, and it will be hosted by our partners at the North Carolina Budget and Tax Center, the North Carolina Inclusive Disaster Recovery Network, and MDC Inc. They are hosting a telephone town hall event for Western North Carolinians affected by Hurricane Helene so that they can share their stories and lift up their needs. State lawmakers and other members of the North Carolina Inclusive Disaster Recovery Network, as well as thousands of Western North Carolinians in those disaster declared counties, have been invited. So you are welcome to join and listen to the voices of Western North Carolinians and help amplify their needs to our state decision makers as they consider additional relief packages for the region. All are welcomed and encouraged to attend, even though registration has ended. If you did not register, you can still listen to the audio, which will primarily be in English, and you can dial in. So we have the call-in number and the extension available in the call notes for you. ASL interpretation is available on Zoom, so we have that opportunity linked for you in the call notes if you need that accommodation. And if you did register, you will receive a phone call to join. But if you have any questions, you can reach out to the Budget and Tax Center at info@ncbudget.org. Last but not least, just highlighting a few reports and resources. There have been a few pieces released recently. The National Income Housing Coalition has released their updated report documenting the impact of the nation's housing trust fund and how each state, as well as the District of Columbia, has planned to use the $248 million that was allocated in 2019 by the Housing Trust Fund. So this report is a few years behind because of both how long it takes to document this, but also for the building and investing in these areas of housing and community development. There is a new updated federal rental assistance fact sheet that has been released by the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. And there have been a few great pieces in the news about community land trusts, as well as what some of the new administration communications and policy leanings might mean for programs at HUD, public housing authorities, and other areas. So with that, I want to thank you again for joining us. Thank you for your patience. If you join us on the live call, we will talk to you next time.